Well, hi everyone. I'm glad to be back again after a couple weeks away and speaking to a group of people up in middle of the state of Wisconsin, and then part of the time just away for a little time in Colorado. But I am really glad to be back and to be able to do this episode today of At the Intersection. So here's a riddle in the form of a poem that I wrote for you. There's a person you know well, but whom you haven't met. You've heard their voice so often, but they've never spoken yet. You're sure to meet them soon one day, and when you finally do, you'll wish you'd met them years before to guide and counsel you. The question is, who is that person? Did you figure it out? Well, I'm going to tell you at this episode, and that revelation is going to launch you into a new discovery about the best way to love yourself and to improve your character for the benefit of others. My name is Doug Newton. I am a pastor for 45 years, author of 24 books. And this is At the Intersection with Doug Newton, where scripture, culture, and character meet. And I'm here to help you pursue the kind of character needed to align with scripture faithfully and to engage culture graciously. Now, each week I make one observation about our culture. I give one insight from the Bible that speaks to that issue, and I suggest one way to strengthen the character that you and I need to relate to our mixed up world with exemplary grace and fresh impact. I say it every week, this is a no gripe zone. Our question is not what's wrong with our culture. It's about what's the right way to respond. So, you ready? Here we go. Did you figure out the riddle? There's a person you know well, haven't met, heard their voice, never spoken. You're sure to meet this person one day and wish you'd met them years before to guide and to counsel you. Who is it? Well, hopefully you figured it out. Some of you figured it out. I mean, it's not that hard of a riddle. It's your future self. See, you've never met your future self, but you've heard the voice a lot. And someday you're going to meet your future self, and they're going to have things that they could tell you that would be important for you to have known at this stage in your life. Now, you can't talk to your future self as, for example, the person that you will be when you are 10 years older or 54 years older. Isn't he such a handsome 15-year-old? And, there are things that I could tell that kid that kid could definitely benefit from. But alas, he never had the opportunity to hear my voice today. And for sure, any person, any of our future selves, who has the privilege of retrospect will be able to tell us what better choices we could have made, choices that would have prevented disappointments or failures or mistakes. I mean, if you could experience now the physical sensations of ailments that you'll be experiencing then, but which would have been preventable by your choices now, you'd probably have much more willpower to treat your body better now, wouldn't you? Over the years, I've worked with people and counseled people whose habits and decisions were putting them on a path to serious problems physically or emotionally or relationally, financially, and of course, spiritually. But they couldn't see it. You see, they couldn't feel it at the time. And it was hard for them to imagine their life as it will be down the road as a result of their decisions in the now. If only they could have had one day to meet and maybe even literally climb inside the life of their future self, they might be shocked into making better decisions. In effect, here's what I wanted to say to them. Love your future self. The choices you are making now feels like you are looking out for yourself, and loving yourself. But if you really love yourself, you need to be thinking about the life of your future self. That's the most important person to love. Now, this is a really hard sell in a culture like ours that trains everyone to get what they want, what they feel like they need now. Now. I've addressed this issue before in one form or another, but we need to keep coming back to recognize the destructive effects of our instant gratification culture and the effects that has on shaping people's expectations and compelling short-sighted decisions. There's an author writing in a 2021 article in Rolling Stone magazine. That article is called, "Has Streaming Amplified the Culture of Instant Gratification?" And here's what he wrote. As fans, we love having constant new content that is readily available, but we're also evolving with a myriad of flawed traits in our collective character, like impatience, social disconnection, and distraction. We don't just want content, we want it right now. Our brains are increasingly wired, he wrote, to pay attention only to things that deliver fast, instantaneous results. And in the process, we have inadvertently made ourselves less willing and perhaps less able to delay gratification and prioritize long-term benefits over short-term indulgence. This is in Rolling Stone magazine. It sounds like it could be part of a preacher's sermon on Sunday morning, doesn't it? And the author goes on to describe the deadening effect on the industry itself as the appetite for streaming fills media with poor quality artistic clutter, while also, and this is very interesting, apparently there's research done on this, leaving many artists with mental health problems due to the pressure that they're under to produce content fast enough to keep up with our binge culture. Years ago, a fellow named Neil Postman in 1985 wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death, where he accused the trend toward visual entertainment of killing rational thought and the access to true knowledge. Well, I think there should be a sequel to that book titled Gratifying Ourselves to Death, which describes the cultural trait of instant access, killing the virtue of patience and the value of deferment. Because we don't want to wait. We don't want to have to wait. We don't learn to wait. So we don't know how to even defer things for the future. And we never even think about loving and caring for our future selves. Sadly, since society is simply the collective total of individuals, the lack of care for our future selves carries over into social institutions and characterizes the body politic today. So, for example, every group studying Social Security agrees that our current system is unsustainable and will not survive the baby boom retirement era. But even though all politicians acknowledge that fact, powerful special interest groups threaten retribution at the ballot box for any politician who dares to craft or support plans that might reduce spending in their area. No one is willing to relinquish some benefit now in favor of a greater benefit 10, 20, 30 years from now. Shouldn't there be enough politicians and media influencers who would persuade their constituents and consumers and followers to care about our future generations enough for us now to share the burden of foregoing certain benefits in our generation? But no, that seems to be an impossible dream. Our culture is too far gone. We are gratifying ourselves to death. Nevertheless, what may be a bridge too far for our society is not out of reach for you and me as individuals. We each can retool our minds and our wills to actually love our future selves. What will make you healthier, happier, and a whole person when you're 60 or 70 or 80. That's the person you should be aiming to serve now. You remember the archetypal story of Esau and Jacob in the Old Testament? That moment when Esau was so hungry, he gave away his inheritance as the firstborn for just one meal to feed his hunger in just that one moment. That's become an enduring warning against trading long-term benefits for short-term gain or pleasures. And that theme is actually the basis of the admiration that's afforded to all of the heroes of the faith in Hebrews chapter 11, that famous chapter. That willingness to look beyond the present for something greater. For example, it's said of Moses in Hebrews 11:26, he chose to be mistreated in that now, along with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. You see, to one degree or another, you and I, we are literally shaping our reward in our later life when we make choices today that will serve our future selves best. But here's the thing. It's not only the best way to love ourselves, it turns out it's also the best way to love others. After all, Jesus said, we're to love our neighbors as ourselves. And a guide for loving others, you see, is how we love ourselves. If loving your future self is critical for your well-being in the future, well, that's how we should love our neighbor. We should love their future selves. We do for them today what will do the most for their welfare tomorrow. In a chapter about loving your neighbor in my book, Fresh Eyes on Famous Bible Sayings, I tell a story about the boarding school I once led. It was located in Appalachia, and in its early years of development, there was very little money. So it's understandable that those folks had to be creative concerning everything they did. So in the late 1930s, they needed to build a small house that included indoor plumbing and indoor bathroom facilities. Really modern, right? So they custom made a septic tank for that house. Now, to save money, they cut corners and they used a foundation wall of the house as one of the four walls of the septic tank. So fast forward into the 1990s, the years that I was there as president, we had a problem. Raw sewage was seeping into the basement of that building. We didn't know why until the backhoe unearthed the explanation. Over the course of time, the mortar joints in the foundation wall eroded enough to allow in the seepage. I wish someone from my era could have been on the job site in those days in the late 1930s and simply, just raised the question, excuse me, what do you think is going to happen 60 years from now, 50 years from now, if the building and the septic tank share a wall like you're planning? But alas, the 1990s school was not there in the 30s to put on the brakes. So in that chapter of the book, I went on to explain that when we think of neighbors, love your neighbors, we shouldn't limit the idea to people who are next door, but also next year or next decade. Neighbors are not just next to us in location, but they're next to us in time. They're not just geographically proximate, but also chronologically proximate. I mean, you get the idea. Those are our neighbors too. And just as none of us would think of leaving our table a mess at a shopping mall food court for the next people to have to clean up, we shouldn't leave any kind of mess for people who will follow us in time. So, whether we're talking about future selves or other people 10 years down the road or 20 years. We need to love those future persons now. So, parents, you may feel like you're not loving your kids for insisting that they clean their room before they go out to play, but you are actually giving them a better life 10 to 20 years from now when they get promotions, when they get recognition, when they get better opportunities at work because they have become responsible, trustworthy people. Schools. You may feel like you are woefully backwards by emphasizing basic skills like reading, writing, including spelling and penmanship, arithmetic, history, social studies, citizenship, rather than focusing on helping kids fit in and find their identity. But you are actually giving kids a better life 10 to 20 years from now by helping them think more knowledgeably, communicate more clearly, so that they will live more freely, free of groupthink and cultural trends. And churches. You may feel like you are loving people now by providing programs for every felt need for every age group rather than concentrating on biblical knowledge, study skills, spiritual disciplines that emphasize particularly prayer, genuine worship that includes an appreciation for church history and even hymnody. But when you do that, you are actually equipping people with much more spiritual stability, discernment, and wisdom, producing much greater maturity, humility, and obedience that's needed for facing the onslaught of the inevitable faith-challenging difficulties with resilience and with perseverance. Now, I want to emphasize, parents, there's nothing wrong with wanting your kids to have fun and play. And schools, there's nothing wrong with wanting to help kids fit in and come to know who they are at that stage in their life. And churches, there's nothing wrong with wanting to meet people's felt needs. Those are all loving things to do. But the best thing the best kind of love for people now is to do what will serve them best 10, 20, 50 years from now. Now, as much as I am a firm believer in putting others first, I do want to circle back around to your own self and close with this. You will do your corner of the world the most good if you are at your best in every stage of your life. That's why it's important to make decisions today to love your future self even more than your present self. Perhaps we should turn carpe diem, seize the day, into carpe futurum, seize the future. This way of loving your future self requires great diligence. I mean, it's like a job. You just have to keep doing it conscientiously and thoroughly. Almost every choice we make today shapes who we are tomorrow. Well, I've got another crosswalk for you today. In this crosswalk, I just give you, as I do with all the crosswalks, I give you a little more opportunity to reflect on these ideas, these insights, and how they might apply in your own life. And so you'll see when you download this free resource that I've got two categories here for you to reflect on. There's loving your future self. And here in this section, I focus on the idea of regrets. To imagine what you might regret when you're 65, 70, 75, 80 years old, and try to head off those regrets in the past by working now in the direction that you need to go. So I have you finish this statement. By the time I am 75 years old, I want to, and I have several bullet points of things for you to think about. I want to have had these 3 experiences, at least. I want to have had completed these goals. I want to be looked up to as a good example. Those are the kind of things where you don't want to have regrets when you're older, so the things you're doing now will help prevent those regrets later. And then the category having to do with loving others' future selves. I give just 3 examples that are almost analogies in some cases about what you need to do now. Like, for example, don't leave messes behind that others have to clean up. My wife Margie and we're thinking about this almost on a weekly or monthly basis at least. We're thinking about, when we're 85 or 90, and then when we're finally gone, we don't want people to have to come. We don't want our kids or anybody else to have to deal with messes that we've left behind. So we're chipping away right now at the buildup of things that we've got laying around. We're making sure that our kids aren't going to have to come behind us and deal with all sorts of unfinished business and all sorts of clutter that we never even asked them for their help on. So those are the kind of things to be thinking about when it comes to loving your future self and to love the future self of others. And you'll need to just think, kind of what might work for you. Now, if you appreciate what I'm trying to do in this podcast, would you share it with your friends and please subscribe to my Fresh Impact YouTube channel. I mean, that does more help and good for kind of furthering the mission of this podcast than you can imagine. And by the way, like I've said before, within 24 hours, I'll have a permanent version on YouTube, not just this live replay. I'll have an audio-only version for those who want to listen on the go. The information of the podcast, past and future, can be found on our website, and all the links can be found at the end of this video. So thanks again so much for tuning in. If you think this podcast is a valuable resource, then I hope you'll continue to let people know about it, but also comment, send me an email. And remember, August is guest month, when I'm going to be interviewing people who are worth admiring. You're going to be fascinated and inspired by their lives. So again, thanks so much for tuning in. Send me your thoughts about what you might like me to address. I'm already looking forward to next week for the next topic on the value of surprise. I hope you'll join me then at the intersection with Doug Newton. And remember, love your future self and the future self of others. We'll see you.